So I grew up Christian, or at least in a denomination that identifies themselves as being Christian. So I was raised Mormon. Don't raise your kids Mormon, they'll end up covered in tattoos on motorcycles, toting guns around, and probably go to prison too. So my mother was a stripper and my dad was a biker. Consequently, they drugged me through a bunch of stuff that would ripple out through the rest of my life, as most of us could probably imagine that they would. Both my parents struggled with their own issues, addiction, sexual immorality. I mean, it was disco time. Cocaine was everywhere, swinger clubs, whole nine yards. So that's kind of how I grew up. Consequently, my grandparents raised myself and my sister for a large part of our childhood. So I always knew who Jesus was. As I started becoming a preteen and a teenager, I really rebelled from everything that had to do with Jesus, Christianity, good living, clean living. It just didn't make much sense to me, and it wasn't exciting. I wanted to live an exciting life. Due to a lot of traumas and things I had experienced growing up, I was a wild child in every sense of the word. At some point, as a teenager, a family that lived in our neighborhood started taking me to church, and they were Lutheran, so I was going to a Lutheran church at the time. I really enjoyed it. Every Sunday, I'd get a sense, although I couldn't identify it at the time, of spiritual fulfillment. Once I left the church, it was game on. Go home, smoke some weed, call some girls, do that kind of stuff. So I grew up in the 80s, 30 miles east of Los Angeles, in the projects. So everything I had been exposed to was, and back then, it wasn't like it is now, like fashionable to be in gangs, fashionable to wear red, blue, whatever. It was serious. I don't know if we have any Second Amendment supporters, followers here, but if you are, we look to California as like this communist country with these archaic gun laws. Well, those all came out of what was going on in the 80s. Bang, 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 shoot them up every single night. Crack was just coming out. So that's how I grew up. As a teenager, my hippie mother relocates us to Minnesota. And so it was a total culture shock. I really hadn't been around white people before. I really hadn't been around rural culture, rural America before up to that point. And I liked it. I'd never seen trees. When I was a kid in elementary school, they used to give us these magazines called Ranger Rick, and they were full of wildlife. I don't know if anybody remembers it, or maybe I'm dating myself. But I'd see these wildlife and pictures of woods and forests and watching shows on Nickelodeon where people were camping. I'd never seen the woods before, right? So it was really neat. As I started growing as a teenager, a lot of that stuff didn't leave. So consequently, I bring the LA streets to rural Midwest county and living. I'm finding the drugs over here, bringing them to my town, recruiting my little buddies. We make this small ragtag army, if you will, of people just doing not good things. Again, I start going to this Lutheran church. I don't feel at all convicted about what I'm doing. It's not even a conscious thought to me, well, hey, maybe I should do the Jesus thing or anything like that. So this goes on for a number of years. Then the county ends up organizing a task force against me and some of my associates. Consequently, I ended up going to prison for a long time. as a result of all these things that I was doing and I was involved in. I get to prison. Still, sometimes we hear testimonies of people who encounter circumstances like this, and it causes them to reflect, reconsider, identify where they hooked left that they should have hooked right, and then start resolving within themselves to implement things into their life to change. I'm here to tell you I didn't have any of that. Actually, the opposite. Prison made me more callous, more violent, I just didn't care. I didn't find God in a jail cell. It just magnified everything that I was. So I go through my prison sentence for years. I'm locked in ADSEG. I'm in a Supermax prison. I'm just so gang inundated and so violent. Well, that's where they stick you when you won't comply. And even then, in a cell by myself, 23 hours a day, totally sense deprived, I just don't care. I've resigned myself to that being my destiny. If anybody invests in this room, you kind of weigh out your options. You have some wins, you have some losses. That's how I viewed criminality, is I'm going to do what I want to do exactly the way I want to do it. And if from time to time I have to end up in jail, that's the downside. I'll get out eventually. Game on again. So, I don't know. I'm 3, 4, maybe 5 years into my prison sentence. And it dawns on me, I actually don't have to live like this. I don't know why it's taken so much pain, so much heartache, strife, and suffering. Sometimes it just takes what it takes. A lot of that's spurred on by, I'm seeing what they call OGs, right? And these are guys that have been doing whatever they've been doing for quite some time. And an interesting thing that I start to notice is when all these old guys come in, some of us, when we socialize, right, we haven't seen somebody or we're just meeting somebody. Hey, what do you do? Well, I went to school here and I do this profession. And 10 years ago, I was doing this. What I started witnessing was all of these convicts, whole relation was about, oh man, you remember 15 years ago when we were down on such and such unit and this and that, and then this guy, I got out and I was out for a year and then 6 years over here. And at any rate, you see enough of these things. And I went to prison at 19 years old, so I was fairly young, fairly impressionable. I matured a lot in there, and it dawns on me, this doesn't even have to be my life. I'm making a decision for this to be my life. So some change starts happening then, but I still had a long way to go. By change, I mean, I don't want the criminality anymore, but I don't want God either. I knew who God was. I knew who Jesus was, but I had no interest in Christian living at that point. I changed some things. I get out. Things are going well. Couple times in there, I also struggled with getting the opposite sex attention and doing this, doing that. Well, sometimes I would meet a girl that was into church. So guess what this guy does? He gets about that church life, right? But it was always temporary. It was never something that was really becoming part of me or that I even had any interest at all, regardless of what I might have been saying at that point. I couldn't care about that stuff. I wanted to burn down beer joints and chase women and do exciting stuff. And the way I viewed believers at that point is like, I just didn't want any of that. Then, fast forward a few more years, and I end up in prison again. This is a time where I find Jesus, right? So I should have come better prepared. I know I'm kind of all over the place, but so I'm married to another woman at this time, and we are having problems like, man, it is drama. But it didn't start out that way. And I think sometimes when we find ourselves in relationships where things are crazy and chaotic and fighting like cats and dogs. Hey, anybody ever know a couple that doesn't give a dang who's around, but when they go at it, everything's coming down? That was me. That was me. Oh, this one time, well, I did that because you did that. Well, you're a horrible person because remember this one time. That was me. That was me, and that was my marriage. So I get this bright idea. Well, it didn't always start out like this. We used to actually love each other and get along and enjoy a lot of the same things. What we need is to find that spark again. What we need to do is we need to still start going out to night spots and drinking and dancing, right? I couldn't find folly in that, right? That only makes sense because that's when things get good. At least I thought. One night, a huge fight ensues, right? And it starts leaving this bar. I'd left my truck unlocked. My wife had her purse stolen with a gun inside of it. She's like, oh my God, I got to call the cops. And, lady, you're crazy. We're both intoxicated, about to get in a car with a gun. What are we going to tell the cops? Let's just go buy another one tomorrow and report stolen tomorrow. At any rate, it gets worse and worse and worse. Then the cops show up, because that's what happens at 3 a.m. when you're in your driveway hurling insults and profanities and every do me wrong, is a neighbor hears and calls the police. Unbeknownst to me, police show up. Now the fight's really on. That night ends with me being tased 4 times in an ambulance, 2 other cops in ambulances, like I've really done it this time. I've really done it this time. I end up in a holding cell, right? 2 voices speak to me, and I don't know where everybody in this room sits on this, but this is my story, and that's where I sit on it. So I'm sitting in a holding cell, and a voice very clearly, not audible in the room, but I can hear it in my head. I can feel it in my heart. And what that voice tells me is that Justin needs to be dead, and he needs to be dead tonight. It tells me that I'm going to have consequences as a result of my actions, but that just is what it is. I'm just going to have to face that music, but I can no longer keep going like this. I believe that to be the voice of the Holy Spirit. No sooner does that voice speak to me than another voice speaks to me. I didn't realize it at the time, but now I believe that was a voice of an enemy. It was a voice of discouragement, despair, hopelessness. And what that voice tells me is, oh, you didn't know God 5 minutes ago. Now you know God. God's worried about cancer kids and battered wives and people who didn't get themselves in the position that they're in. They're victims. You were no victim. Regrettably, I don't pray that night, even though that's what I was directed to do. Miraculously, I get a bond. I've jumped a bond and ran around the country before. I've got a federal gang file on me. I'm formerly part of a group that the Department of Homeland Security classifies as domestic terrorists, right? All this stuff pulls up for the government, for law enforcement. So I really shouldn't have gotten a bond, is my point. And I got a pretty low one. It's $50,000, $5,000, bam, I'm out of jail. And this is where the story really starts to take off. I bond out of jail. I've been drinking my whole life. I've been drugging my whole life. I go home, all the booze gone, all the drugs gone. And this is something I hadn't previously been able to do. I really believe I was spiritually delivered from my addiction. I made a decision. I cried out to the Lord, and I was spiritually delivered from my addiction. I tried to quit previously, right? And I never was able to. As a matter of fact, I had people in my life that thought I should sober up. That when I did try to sober up, I became so angry and irritable and hostile. These people would give me feedback that was along the lines of, hey, you should never try to sober up again, and you should do exactly what you've been doing, because we cannot live with you like this. But I was never able to do it. I'll tell you that night, and that was 10 years ago now, I haven't had a drink or a drug or anything since it had been removed from me. I don't do it. So anyway, I get out of jail and I start reaching out to people I know who are believers in my life that, were in my life, but kind of in the background, because we were doing something totally different. Hey, where do I find a church? What church should I go to? Should I go to a Methodist church, an Adventist church? What should I go to? A friend tells me, look for a small church that has house churches. House church? Oh, that sounds like some more of that cult indoctrination stuff that they had over at the Mormon church, right? I'm good with that stuff. I don't need to be told how to think. But I do. It wasn't this church. It was another church. I get over there. Man, it really changed my life. Asking God into my heart, being real with myself, growing in my faith, that's what changed my life. I'm not saying that that my ways are for surefire way if you're dealing with a bunch of crap and mess and skeletons and shame and all these things that had led me to become who I'd become. But I know it worked for me. So I'm going to this other church, and it was not a small church. They billed themselves as we're a small church, but it had, hundreds of members. But they had house church there, and I really liked that. It gave me a chance to get to know people, make friends, because all my friends were not doing good stuff. So I didn't know anybody that didn't smoke weed. I didn't know anybody that wasn't involved in, to some degree or other, criminal activity. I needed to get these people out of my life, but we're social beings. That's who we're created to be as humans. So now I need this new social structure, and that provided that for me. Then a good friend of mine ends up leaving that church and coming here, and he's calling me all the time. Bro, you need to come check out this church. You need to come. I don't know. We're having this Christmas party. I don't know about that either. I'm not sure how I got here, really. Like, I don't remember making the conscious decision. All right, well, I'm going to go leave this church that's perfectly fine and hasn't really done anything to me, and I guess I'll go check out your church. But I do get here. Same thing, like Ariel, we're upstairs, one room. The thing I noticed here immediately was everybody was very closely connected. And it wasn't intimidating to me. It wasn't like, oh, well, I guess I'm just a tattooed outsider of all these merry band of do-gooders. I didn't feel that way at all, right? They embraced me. They loved me. They pulled me in, right? And they really were the friends, my circle of support. They prayed a miracle into existence. I've seen this church pray miracles into existence numerous times. And they did it in my life, right? So the second time I go to prison, because I always got to do things 2 or 3 times just to make sure it wasn't a good fit. So we're having home fellowships and church, and we were a much smaller church then. And Coach, Scott, Doug, they're praying prayers over me every week. And they're praying crazy stuff like, God, blow the courthouse down. Because I'm on bond, right? And I'm fighting this drug out for a couple years.
Wasn't that drastic, but
But yeah, no, they're really praying hard. So here's the deal. So, another example of God's hand moving in my life. I don't know. I feel like nobody in this room's ever been in legal trouble. So let me tell you this. In the state of Texas, if you're convicted of an aggravated crime, and aggravated crime means using a weapon in commission of that crime, you have to do 50% of your time before you're even eligible to come up for parole. that didn't happen for me, and I went to prison for aggravated assault. Been in prison before. It's just not good. I really should have done most of the 10 years that they gave me, but I didn't. So I go to my intake meeting. Hey, you come up for parole in like 2 months. What? All right, I'll take anything I can get, I suppose. But I really thought that they were going to catch that clerical error that must have happened somewhere, and there's no way they're going to let me out of prison. So I should have done 5 years. Before I could even come up for parole, I come up at 12 months, and they give it to me. Takes a little while to process out. It takes another year, but still, on a 10-year sentence, I did 2 of them. Meanwhile, the church had been hugely supportive of me. I'm hearing from people on a regular basis here in church, checking in on me. Hey, read this. I sent you that. Scott's handwriting Bible studies, sending them to me. Just tremendous support there. Support that I've never experienced anywhere ever in life. Support I expected, that I'd been looking for in other aspects, right? Of other social connections and social circles that I had previous that just wasn't there. There was no doubt that this was my family. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of essentially my story. I know it's all over the place, but my point in all that is how I came to the Lord was in a jail cell, tired, given up, beaten down, just tired of the mess, and didn't know how to get myself out, didn't know how to empower myself. Through my faith and through this church, that's what allowed me to become empowered, to grow, to stop being all that stuff. I'm glad that nobody looks like hugely shocked in this room. I thought they were like, oh, because I live really a great life. I'm tremendously blessed. My family lives a life of overwhelming abundance, but didn't look like that, I'm a kid that grew up in the projects on food stamps and, but, by the grace of God, when I came off the porch, so to speak. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that phrasing. Usually it's used in a different context, but I'm going to use it within the context of faith. Man, my life, it just got better and better and better. And I feel like I still haven't hit the summit. I'm still going up. But that's all I got.